let's just wait a couple of minutes until people join, until more people come in. And in the meantime, can you please put in the chat box where you're connecting from and what kind of things are you expecting or are you hoping this webinar covers? If you have any specific questions that you brought in, please leave them in the chat box right now, and I will see if I can cover them as we go along the way. And if not, just say where you're connecting from. So, Maria Cristina, you're connecting from Minas. Good. Rio, Felipe. Beatriz also from Rio. Silvia also from Minas. Okay. We see more. See people from Curitiba, Floripa. Tietê, please correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure I spelled that, I pronounced that really, really badly. Leme, Mato Grosso, wow. Paco from Ecuador, wow. That's a long way from Paraná. Okay, let me, okay, there are a couple more people joining in. Norma from Sao Carlos in Sao Paulo. Wow, so lots and lots of different places today, which is great to see. And so let me start sharing my screen so I can ask you the first question and we can sort of get warmed up. So, as I was telling you before, my name is Pablo Toledo, and I work for Cambridge University Press and Assessment. And in my work, I mostly cover areas connected with assessment, but as we are connected with exams and learning materials, I am very, very, very happy to be expanding and sort of spreading my wings a little bit wider. And the topic we're going to be talking about today is an amazing opportunity to do just that. So, and today we will be talking about beyond B2. So what is this going to be about? What is it that I am thinking of working on? Basically, we will be talking about advanced language. B2, as you probably know, as I'm sure you know, comes from the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, and it refers to the level that is usually sort of like an easy sort of shorthand for it is the level that we, in the past, we might have called upper intermediate, and that is covered by the Cambridge exam B2 First. It's an exam that you're probably familiar with. And this is an interesting level to think about, or this is an interesting boundary, because for many schools, for many of the schools in our Latin American contexts, in Brazil, but also outside of Brazil, B2 is a level which, if you're thinking about an exit level for a secondary school, would place you definitely above the average school, definitely above the minimum guidelines of what is expected for pretty much every country in our region. If you're thinking about Brazil, well, of course, that changes from state to state, and now the bilingual policy is sort of in the process of taking shape. But in any case, a level like B2 is what would be expected from someone graduating from university, in an optimistic case. If you're thinking of countries like Argentina or Colombia or Peru or Chile or Uruguay, B2 is definitely a level that is not expected. However, many schools that define themselves as bilingual schools, not bilingual in the sense of public policy in Brazil right now, for instance, but bilingual in the classic English bilingual school. Think of that as a kind of very solid target, a target that sets them apart from others. And in certain contexts, in certain cities, in certain areas, in certain regions of certain countries, B2 has become kind of like the standard for schools that want to claim to have some degree of bilingualism. Now, or to have like a relatively high level of bilingualism. However, there are challenges for that, and we will be talking about them today. But one of the challenges, especially if you're thinking about the school context, is that if you're thinking about 15, 20 years ago or more, 20, 30 years ago, for a school to say that it had reached the level by 2 definitely set them head, shoulders, and half a torso above the competition, let's say above others. It definitely made a difference. Right now, as more schools are reaching those standards, it is becoming less of a distinction. And also, we see more schools wanting to take the next step. And the next step is towards the advanced levels, what would be levels in the Common European Frameworks, level C1 and C2. Also, this is a critical level for us teachers, because ideally, teachers would be at this level, or would expect to be at this level, or would try to be at this level. It is part of our professional qualifications. I mean, it is, even if we teach lower levels, our responsibility, because it is part of the job, it is the thing that we are teaching, is to be as advanced as we can in our own language. So if we think about it from a learner's perspective, from a school's perspective, from a teacher's perspective, it is becoming even more important. And if we're thinking about it from a practical perspective, if you have students going to university who are then interested in going to study abroad, in continuing postgraduate studies or looking for opportunities for scholarships or funding to study in other countries, it is going to become very, very critical. And actually, in Brazil, I don't need to reinforce the importance and the risks of this, because in Brazil, my usual example, or the case that I usually mention, my cautionary story, to talk about why it is important to think about advanced or more advanced levels of English as part of education, comes from Brazil. It is the case of Science Without Borders, Ciência Sem Fronteiras. So, as you know much better than me, this was a program that was launched in the first Lula administration, and the idea was to bring thousands of students, graduates, teachers, etc., scientists, researchers from Brazil in contact with their counterparts outside of the country. Now, the challenge that this program had was that at one point, basically, most people who were applying for the funding to go to study abroad applied to study in Portugal. Now, why is that? Okay, Portugal has some good universities, I will give you that, but it's not the biggest country in the world for scientific research. But of course, it is the biggest country in the world outside of Brazil that speaks Portuguese. So clearly, it was about the language barrier. So in one case in which, for once in our Latin American lives, there was money to be invested in the development of researchers, students, scientists, etc., there wasn't. The thing that made the program not as successful as it could have been was a language barrier. And that's a shame. So, however, there is something that, so before we go on, or before we look into other challenges or areas around that, I want to start with a question for you, and I want you to use your chat boxes for that. Because we are talking about levels, C1, C2, advanced English, blah, 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 but we haven't really defined anything. So what, for you, makes English advanced? If you had to think of a way to describe it, to explain it, if you have to think of what are you looking at, what are you looking for to say that somebody has advanced English, what is it? What would it be? I don't want to say anything because I don't want to influence your thinking in one way or another. I'm genuinely interested in what you type and suggest here. So my question once again is, what makes English advanced? What features, how do you recognize it? So we have one first answer here from Lisiane, being able to use a greater variety of language tools to express ourselves. So so that is definitely lots of interesting things, because we have the greater variety of tools. So we are talking about the range of lexes, grammar, etc., that we use. But but Lisiane mentioned being able to use those things. And one thing that we are going to talk about later on is what is the difference, or what sort of, is it the same to say that I know something or that I use something, that I know it or that I use it actively? And then the idea of using this to express ourselves. This is not about knowing something in the abstract. This is not about being able to mention 5 synonyms for this or 10 different ways of saying that. It is about expressing ourselves using them. Then, David, to be able to interact with all sorts of people and to be able to understand media. So, yes, when we think about advanced language, it is logical that one of the first things that comes to mind is language production. But of course, language reception is included there. So interacting with all sorts of people, not just being able to make ourselves understood, but to understand a broad range of people. And all sorts of people is an interesting word, because it means all sorts of people in all sorts of contexts. Sometimes, or some people's idea of advanced language is very unusual, elaborate, formal, academic language. And in fact, advanced language, I would agree here with the idea that it is about having sort of a broad range of possible interactions, of possible contexts for interaction. So, and then to be able to understand media, so this idea of being able to understand language that is current, not just, yes, I am an advanced, my English is advanced because I can read Shakespeare. Unfortunately, we will not be interacting with Shakespeare very often. He's been dead for 500 years. Actually, the day before yesterday, April the 23rd, was the anniversary of his death, or in theory, the anniversary of his death. You're never sure with records that old. But we will not be interacting with Shakespeare. So things like media, which are current, contemporary, much more relevant. Beatriz says, related to one's ability to perform a variety of tasks, and that is a very interesting idea to bring in, that it's about being able to do more things with English, not so much about how much language, or it's not about quantifying the language, it's about looking at the things you can do, reading more complex texts and expressing abstract ideas, for example. And the idea of expressing abstract ideas is very important, as we will see one of the dimensions that the Common European Framework looks at when it looks at the progression of levels is the complexity and the level of abstraction of the things that we can express ourselves about. So the idea of abstract ideas is definitely very much in line with that. The ability to deal with a language intertwining all the realms of language in pragmatical context. Wow, that is very detailed, and I couldn't agree more. The ability to speak, write, read, and listen very well and clearly, says Lawrence. And yes, we can then go into the what do we mean by that conversation, but let's have it another time. Now, I have found this. There isn't as much literature about, or there isn't as much interest in recent language teaching in developing advanced levels as there is in developing other levels. So I will be mentioning or quoting from a few of the places that I've read where I have found ideas that were interesting in trying to define or understand advanced language. But I have to say there were not as many as I would have wanted. However, this was a very interesting idea to put the whole thing into context from Berger and Heaney in this book, Developing Advanced English Language Competence. We could characterize advancedness as a learner's knowledge and control of a large repertoire of linguistic resources to be used in a number of situations and for various purposes. So knowledge and control, so knowing it, but also controlling it, using it appropriately, then to be used, so of a large repertoire, so the idea that there are more tools available, to be used in a number of situations and for various purposes. This idea of the many contexts, the different things. Now, advancedness then, based on this definition, is two-dimensional. One dimension is that advanced learners can perform an ever-increasing number of communicative activities in various domains. So advanced learners can do more things. This was present in many of your definitions. But there is a second dimension, which is, looking sideways here, that advanced learners can perform communicative activities in increasingly complex and sophisticated ways. So it's not just about I am able to do more things. It's about I am able to do more complex things. And this is very clearly seen in things like reading or listening, but let's focus on reading. When we think about advanced reading, we are thinking of somebody who knows a lot of vocabulary, but we are also thinking of someone who is able to read between the lines, to understand irony, to understand when the intention of a text is different from what is actually put in there. Somebody who is able to summarize a text, to interact with it in more complex ways, to respond to it, to analyze it more deeply. So it's not just about I can read very long texts with lots of words, with lots of syllables that are very infrequent, or I can read texts about which are legal or academic or etc., etc., etc. What makes an advanced reader is also the complexity and the subtlety of my reading. So it is these two dimensions of, on the one hand, yes, I can do more things, I can use more resources, but on the other hand, I can do things which are more complex, more subtle, more abstract, more elaborate. Does this make sense? So, another question for you. Is advanced English for everybody? Who is it for? Should it be the aim of every learner of English to become an advanced learner of English? Who is it that is required to have it? Who would benefit from that? Or maybe your answer is yes, everybody should be an advanced user of English. What do you think? For the ones who are willing to never stop learning, Luciane, absolutely. And also, in this sense, this is part of our goal, which has to do with autonomy as well. We are not just trying to bring people up to a certain level of English. We are trying to get them to engage with language and to continue with that for life. So definitely, it's about this idea of always learning and always noticing. Then Robert, yes, makes a lot of sense. Not necessarily, says Lawrence. David, to my mind, it depends upon your goals in life. And that is true. So it depends. And for our case, I'm going to focus on like the first step towards advancedness, because actually this question of is it for everybody? If you look at the Common European Framework, and if you look at descriptions for levels, for the advanced levels C1 and C2, the distinction between the two is more like, okay, there is a clear definition for C1, and C2 is, if you're a gamer, you will recognize the reference, like the more advanced sort of, it's like if you're in a game, if you're playing a video game, C2 is like the super advanced mode, the super advanced difficulty level, like the super hard level. Like you're expected to do everything, and C1 kind of has that. But in C2, it's like you're expected to do everything with your eyes closed and your hands tied behind your back. It's like you do everything with a degree of excellence. So I will focus on the distinction on where I do see a very, very clear border, which is between B2 and C1. And I think everything changes after B2, which is why the title of this session is Beyond B2, because I think definitely there is a very, very meaningful change beyond B2. Is it for everybody? Ideally, if we want to people who are engaged with language, who are plurilingual, who want to explore languages, we would want them to have this kind of engagement. It is true, as Beatriz says, also that language competence is never even. So we will have people who are excellent at one particular thing because it is relevant to them, because they use it in their jobs, because they use it in their studies, because they use it in their everyday lives, or because it is something that is connected with something that is relevant for them, but maybe not with something else. A typical case would be people in academia. People in academia engage with lots of research that they read, papers, books, etc., and they write papers and things and reports, usually in English, because most academic texts, most scientific texts, are published in English if they are meant for like a major international audience. However, for somebody who engages with that, maybe their listening skills are not, their oral interaction is not something that they practice a lot. So when they have to go to a conference and they have to present, okay, they can do a presentation about what, but then they go on the corridors and they're kind of sweating blood because how am I'm not sure I can have like I don't feel really confident or as confident having having a conversation face to face about things which can be also outside of my research. So I can have a very advanced sort of and a super experienced and advanced level in certain fields, certain topics, certain ways of communication, doesn't necessarily extend to other areas, and we expect that. I mean, and that is to be expected because that is also a reflection of our lives. Also, it may be that there are people who say, yeah, but you know what, to me, that kind of engagement with English is not as important because I want to have that kind of engagement with other languages. I study French, I study Italian, I study Chinese, and those are languages that actually I feel closer to, and English to me is more of an instrumental thing. I'm going to need it, and I want to be able to engage with things in English. But am I interested in reaching that super high level? Not really in English. You know what? I get it that you love English. I like it. I don't love it as much. And it is a legitimate choice for a learner of English to say, I'm only interested in getting this far. Rafael adds here, advanced English is for people who may and can deal with different realities, such as feel more free interacting with multiple contexts, maybe in different specific positions. Definitely, it's if you want to engage with that, if you want to be able to deal with that, then you will need that. So we're talking about advanced. With a lot of theory there. Let me present you with a couple more ideas to start defining terms. So like I said, we will be focusing mostly on the transition up to C1, which is like the advanced one, let's call it, level as it is defined. Or actually the language in the Common European Framework refers to C1 and C2 as the proficient levels. So understanding C1, the most generic description of C1 in the Common European Framework is known, and actually for all levels, not just C1, is what is known as the global scale descriptor. So for an independent user C1, a C1 user of English, or any language really, a C1 user of language can understand a wide range of demanding longer texts and recognize implicit meaning. So remember what I said, it's not just that, so the text, so it is a wide range of texts, and they are demanding, they are long, they are complex, they have many sections, they have elaborate vocabulary, but they can also recognize implicit meaning. It's not just about being able to deal with this expanded language, it's about reading more deeply into it. Independent user C1 can express him or herself fluently and spontaneously without much obvious searching for expressions. They can use language flexibly and effectively for social, academic, and professional purposes. So if you look at the descriptors for B1, B2, for the earlier levels, there is an expectation and an acknowledgement that people who are learning the language will struggle, they will have difficulty, and that difficulty will sometimes be visible, and that is accepted and actually expected. At this level, the idea is that there shouldn't be an obvious searching for expressions, that there should be a projection of somebody using the language more fluidly. And the idea of using it flexibly and effectively is very important. So I can use it for different purposes, not just in a very narrow and specific field. And I can use it effectively to get things done. I can do with language what I need to do for social, academic, and professional purposes. Because we associate levels like C1 with academic English, people who are interested in doing postgraduate studies in English-speaking contexts, C1 is the level that they have to demonstrate. So lots of people looking to develop C1 or to certify a level of C1 with some kind of international exam are interested in academic English and are interested in the language that they will need to write academic papers, to read academic texts, to interact in academic lectures and sessions. However, this talks about social and professional uses as well, so it is broadening the spectrum very, very much. And one more thing, because we haven't talked about writing yet, they can produce clear, well-structured, detailed text on complex subjects. So notice how clear, well-structured, detailed, so all of the ideas of what makes a text complex, showing controlled use of organizational patterns, connectors, and cohesive devices. So we tend to associate advanced English with lots of words, difficult words, unusual words, etc., etc. But here it talks a lot, it specifically refers to how a text is connected and put together. It's not just at the level of lexis, it's not just at the level of developing correct and grammatical sentences that follow the rules. There is something here about connecting, making a good text, making a good discourse, making something that is clearly not just a sequence of one sentence and then another sentence and then another sentence. Especially because a lot of the textual formats that we associate with this level are longer. They do tend to have sections and deal with abstract ideas. So the sequence in which you present ideas, the ways in which you organize your text, how you follow the conventions for certain kinds of texts. If you're writing an essay, if you're writing an academic paper, if you're writing an article for a journal, if you're writing a report for a work context, etc., etc. These things have specific structures. So following those conventions, following those structures becomes really important. So if we want to go a little bit deeper into these, let's compare what changes from the level below B2 to C1, in which ways do these advance? So I have kind of lined up the global scales with the paragraphs that deal with similar things. So we go from can understand the main ideas of complex text on both concrete and abstract topics, including technical discussion in his or her field of specialization, that is B2. Look at how, as we go into C1, the main ideas of complex text become understanding and recognizing implicit meaning. How including technical discussions in my field of specialization becomes understanding a wide range of demanding and longer texts. And then the concrete and abstract topics become demanding texts. So you can see how this is developing in different dimensions. What about oral expression? Can interact with a degree of fluency and spontaneity that makes regular interactions with native speakers quite possible without strain for either party. Now, the changes from one to the other are so many and so clear that I will just leave this one with you. But we go from interacting with a degree of fluency and spontaneity to expressing myself fluently and spontaneously. Then the idea of that I can interact with a degree that makes regular interaction sort of okay, without a lot of effort, becomes expressing myself flexibly and effectively for a number of uses, and without obvious searching for expressions. So the expectations sort of rise at a sort of pretty high or pretty steeply. What about writing? Can produce clear, detailed text on a wide range of subjects and explain a viewpoint on a topical issue, giving the advantages and disadvantages of various options. So as you can see, this develops completely. Clear, detailed text becomes clear, well-structured and detailed text. So the idea of organization that we also see at the end of in this organizational patterns, connectors, and cohesive devices, this idea of the structuring the organization is very present, the development of that, explaining a viewpoint on a topical issue, giving advantages and disadvantages, becomes expressing abstract ideas, becomes talking about complex subjects. So the difference, there is clearly a line between B2 and what is beyond B2. It's like the expectations have gone up on a number of different dimensions. I'm showing you this so that you can have a sense of all of the dimensions in which this develops. And now, very, very quickly, because I don't want to spend too much time diving into these, I'm going to take you into a little bit more detail. I'm going to break it down and show you some of the expectations for sub skills, for specific communicative activities. If we think of production, overall oral production, this is the description of what is expected for C1. This is what is expected to be considered, let's say, at the lower level of the advanced levels. Clear, detailed descriptions and presentations on complex subjects. There we go. We read that one before. Integrating sub-themes, developing particular points, and rounding off with an appropriate conclusion. So there is something there about speaking with structure, about speaking not just as a string of sentences, which is very coherent with what is expected in written production. So, because if you look at the first bullet point, underlining the relevant salient issues, expanding and supporting points of view, with subsidiary points, reasons, and relevant examples, rounding off with a conclusion, it pretty much echoes the idea that advanced discourse in speaking and in writing needs to be structured and organized, and also can employ the structure and conventions of a variety of genres in writing, varying the style, tone, register according to addressee, text type, and theme. So the idea is not that an advanced person can write formally or academically. The idea is that an advanced person knows a range of registers, a range of ways, and is able to choose the best way to communicate in each of these contexts. So not too formal when it needs to be casual, not too casual when it needs to be formal. What about reception? In terms of overall oral comprehension, can understand enough to follow extended discourse on abstract and complex topics beyond their own field with things they're not familiar with, though they may need to confirm details, so it is okay to ask. You're not expected to just be an understanding machine, especially if the variety isn't familiar, which is interesting because at this level, C1, sort of as we get into the advanced levels, is when we begin to see references to understanding more varieties of language. And this doesn't just mean formal, informal, academic, social language. It also means different accents, different varieties of English. Can recognize a range of idiomatic expressions and colloquialisms, appreciating register shifts, can follow extended discourse even when it is not clearly structured, so a more casual social conversation. In terms of reading, can understand in detail lengthy complex texts, and can understand a wide variety of texts, including, and you can see all of this. And then the Common European Framework also refers to interaction and mediation, so very quickly, overall oral interaction can express themselves fluently and spontaneously, almost effortlessly. It is expected that there is definitely a lot going on backstage when you're speaking in the language, but it is not visible. If you remember, the B2 definition talked about with some sort of that you can be understandable with some strain, with not enough to be a problem, but some strain is expected. Here, I can express myself fluently, spontaneously, almost effortlessly. It's the idea of just gliding like a ballerina. Has a good command of broad lexical repertoire, allowing gaps to be overcome with circumlocution. So when I don't know something, I can just, okay, I will take route B and say it is somewhere. There is little obvious searching for expressions or avoidance strategies. And then in terms of writing, can express themselves with clarity and precision relating to the addressee flexibly and effectively. And in terms of mediation, okay, we are not really going there, but I am expected to be able to summarize things, respond to things, build on contributions to a discussion, act as a mediator, explaining things to other people, even with, well, etc., etc. But I think the oral interaction and the written interaction descriptors here really capture the things we were talking about in the reception and production. So it is clear looking at this that advanced language is not more of the same. Now, a question for you, a quick one, before we go deeper into this. You haven't looked at your chat, at your keyboards in a while. So what makes teaching advanced English different if you have had the experience of teaching more advanced courses? What have you noticed that is new? What have you noticed that hasn't changed, that becomes harder or easier? Or thinking about yourself as English learners, as you were progressing into the advanced levels, what changed for you in your experience? What was new? What changed? What became harder? What became easier? Joanna says that we must think faster because we're going to receive answers faster. It is true. One of the challenges of teaching an advanced course is that you have advanced learners at the other end. So they will ask for more things. They will be more curious. They will be more interested in language. They will be faster in responding. They will give you more complex things. It is a challenge, especially the first time that you do it, or the first few times you do it. It tests your limits as a teacher. It's classes you have to prepare for. You have to dig up your dictionaries. You have to really go into things. Lisiane says that more books and vocabulary based on linguistic corpus. Yes, students are getting lazier. AI is always on the way when it comes to homework. Okay, but if you have someone who is interested, okay, we're going to be talking about motivation later. Making them independent learners, technology makes it easier, but it also makes it harder because some of the ways in which technology makes it easier are amazing. I mean, looking for dictionaries, access to reference material, to real language now compared to what things were like 20 years ago, or when I was a student at that level. It's night and day. I collected magazines. I recorded random videos from CNN, or I scanned things in media. But if I wanted to find specific texts about a specific subject where I could find language that was current on a topic on one specific topic, it was a really difficult thing. Nowadays, I can just go on Google, or I can just go on YouTube, or I can just go on Instagram. I can be surrounded by language in a way that for learners of my generation was unthinkable. And that is amazing. Now, I can give my text to AI and say, make it better, make it more advanced. That may be a way in which technology is not really helping. It's kind of getting in the way. Use of English language elements turns into something more elaborate for our learners, says David, and that is absolutely right. There are going to be a lot of technical procedural things getting in the way. The ease of conversational realities that brings new input and output to the classroom, absolutely. And students using AI is worrying too for Robert. Well, it is there. It's a challenge. We'll be talking about some things connected with that in a minute. So what makes teaching advanced learners different? Some ideas that I have found and which I think you might find interesting. There are new things to learn. There are old things to relearn. There is a question about what is the point of it. So let's begin with the new things to learn. And let's talk about the elephant in the room. And the elephant in the room when it comes to advanced language is that the usual approach to communicative language teaching is not a good fit for advanced learners. What do I mean? Communicative competence has aspects. The way communicative competence was described, it was first described by Del Hines in the late 1960s. Henry Widdowson used that as the foundation of the communicative approach, Widdowson and others. But then Canali and Swain kind of gave like an interesting sort of restating of the different aspects of communicative competence and how they developed. And they talked about 4 categories. So 4 aspects. One aspect is the grammatical and linguistic aspect. So making correct sentences using the right lexis, the right grammar, and building a sentence that is correct. Then there is the discourse aspect, which is connecting ideas, organizing a text, bringing things together, organization, coherence, cohesion, etc., etc. Then there is the social linguistic aspect of communicative competence, which is the interactive aspect, and which is the understanding things like register, levels of politeness, ways to, what are the conventions for writing a specific kind of text? Because I want to write a letter of complaint, and okay, there are the ideas that I want to say, but there are also certain formats, certain conventions to writing letters, which are social conventions. So I need to start with a date, and I need to start with a place, and I need to write dear sir or madam, and I need to end with a greeting, and I need to blah, blah, blah in the middle. All of that is social. And then there is another aspect, which is my strategic aspect, my strategic use of language, which is connected with learning. If I don't know how to say something, what strategies do I have to sort that out? If I don't understand something that is put to me, how do I manage to learn from it and to make people explain it to me? Now, lower level learners develop high strategic and some social linguistic competence as a compensation. So when I am beginning to learn a language, I don't have a lot of vocabulary, and I don't have a lot of grammar, and so one thing that we encourage our learners to develop, and this is a very communicative language teaching thing to do, is to motivate them to develop avoidance strategies, to develop strategies that will allow them to express themselves with some errors in ways which are not standard, in ways which are understandable but not correct, maybe, but to just make themselves understood. The idea is that what is important is intelligibility. Can I understand what you're trying to say? Then it's okay. So there is a lot of strategic competence going on, and there is some social linguistic competence going on in how I manage the social interaction, like, oh, my English is not very good, I'm sorry, or is this correct? So ways in which I can manage the situation. But advanced performance is mostly about linguistic and discourse competence. So I am expected to have very high social linguistic awareness. And because I need to communicate effectively, there is a lot of strategic competence going on. But in advanced, what many of the things, or most of the things that we use to describe advanced language are actually about the development of our vocabulary, what are the tools that I actively use, how accurate am I, how deep am I, how sophisticated I am in my use of language. So this idea that if I can understand you, it's okay, is exactly the opposite of what we need to develop advanced language. So it's like, if I was a student, I mean, I can understand where our students are coming from. It's like, if I was a student, I would be saying, come on, Pablo, when I started learning with you as an elementary learner, you said, just express yourself. If I can understand you, that's perfect. And now you are telling me that I need to be accurate, that I need to use all of this vocabulary that you never bothered with me with before. You are giving me stick when I make certain mistakes that you never complained about before. And the thing is, yes, everything changes at this level. And there is a social cultural competence to engage and project your identity. Because going beyond B2 is about being oneself effortlessly in English. If you remember from the descriptors we saw before, this idea of expressing yourself effortlessly was there. This idea of projecting who you are. This is the level in which you go beyond just, I can say something, I can transmit my idea, to I can transmit my idea the way I want. I can transmit my idea and project the image and create the impression on you as a listener or a reader that I am expecting to do it. So I always say that the difference between a B2 doctor and a C1 doctor is that the B2 doctor can talk to a patient, can understand the symptoms, what is the problem that the patient has, and can tell the patient what the problem with them is and what they need to do to get better. A B2 doctor can do it. A C1 doctor can do that like a doctor would, projecting the professional impression of a doctor, projecting the authority of a doctor, and using the language that a doctor would use. Not just your stomach hurt, not that, saying you have colitis, so, or whatever. So in terms of the new things to learn, I'll be quoting from Lever and Sheckman now, and you've got the title of a book there. At the lower levels, students need to acquire the basic linguistic system and some understanding of culture. At the highest levels, students have at their, one button pressed too much. Okay. At the highest levels, students have at their fingertips multiple correct structures to express the same idea, as well as a sense of how to build their own unique structures in pertinent situations, and they are searching for phraseology as well as discourse type that will best meet their communicative needs on a social linguistical, social cultural, and emotional basis appropriate to the cultural situation. So at the lower levels, you have the basic tools and some understanding of how connections between people work. At an advanced level, you have a lot of tools which allow you to cover a lot of different needs. And what you are looking for is, how can I use the most appropriate tool for this precise situation, for something that will, so in a way that is appropriate to the cultural situation and the goal of my communication. How can I use all of these things that I know, which are a lot? How can I choose which is the best for this thing that I need to do in this context? Thus, the words and the grammar have become important again in advanced language, but in the same way that they are important to the well-educated native speaker. How best to express oneself in order to convince, persuade, convey information, or achieve any other particular communicative need. So, does it mean that because I am an advanced learner, I don't need to worry about grammar because I already know grammar? No. What it means is that I am going to think about my grammar and my vocabulary and how to analyze it just as much as I did when I was an elementary learner, but my goal is going to be, how can I use it best for what I need to do? How can I express myself best? It's not how can I explain my idea, it's how can I get the way I express my idea to do the exact thing that I need it to do. So that means that there are old things that we are going to have to relearn. We're going to have to fight the fossils, because in our communicative drive in the elementary and intermediate levels to just put fluency over accuracy, to just to privilege the fact that they use English and that they feel confident using English on top of their accuracy, which is perfect. It is exactly what it should be. But now, to become advanced, we're going to have to go back and correct all of those fossilized mistakes, all of those things that they consistently use incorrectly, we're going to have to fix. Grammar, discourse, and vocabulary need to be rebuilt with a focus on depth, breadth, precision, and automaticity. Automaticity, too many syllables. So we are going to have to rethink. If you look at the units in an advanced English course book, they cover things like the present perfect. And it's like, are we back to year one? No, we are not back to year one, because what we are doing now is looking very comprehensively at every possible context in which you would use that tense, which is one of the very first things you learn in English. But now you're going to look at it systematically. You're going to cover every possible meaning of that. So, and the idea is that you want to use, but the other idea is that you want to use all of the tools at your disposal, that okay, I didn't bother too much in did you use a simple past where you could have used the present perfect when you were an intermediate learner, but now I want you to be precise and I want you to use the exact tool for that particular sentence. I want you to put everything into active use. And the automaticity thing is important. It's just that the mechanics of the grammar need to be a part of your biology, because when you're speaking, if you when you're speaking in the language, things are either easy, like I know this, I can do this, I remember this, it is activated for me, or impossible. If I have to think too much about how to build a certain structure or how to choose the right word, I'm going to go and choose another one. So automaticity becomes important. I need to narrow the receptive productive gap. I was talking about that right now, that there is a distinction between input and intake. So what I read versus what I acquire. When we are working in the classroom, we need to focus on stretched output. So stretched output meaning I don't expect you to just explain to just say something. I expect you to use all of the vocabulary that you know, the vocabulary that we've been practicing, the specific vocabulary for this topic, the specific grammatical structures for this. Just I can understand you is not good enough, because that means that there are things that I know but I don't use, that are part of my passive knowledge, not my productive active knowledge. And then fluency is not the opposite of complexity. In fact, one of the hallmarks, one of the identifying marks of an advanced user of language is complex, fluid discourse. So fluency is not the opposite of complexity. General comprehension becomes a given. I mean, I give you a text, I know that you can read it and tell me what it is about. I ask you to listen to something, I expect you to understand what is the topic. Does he agree or disagree with this? The focus is now on language awareness, on form, on intent, what is the intention behind this, and on the nuances. And then our diagnostic, our assessment skills in the classroom become crucial, because also developing advanced English is a lot about knowing what to review, knowing what to focus on. And there is also a balanced growth, because when we think about things like grammar and vocabulary, it is very easy to think of it like, oh, I need to learn lots of new stuff. But actually, it's two things. First of all, I need to do more with what I have. So more uses for the grammar that I know. Expanded metaphorical uses for lexis. So I know what a table is. It is one of the first words I learned in English. But do I know expressions with table, or do I know that in business we talk about we are going to table this conversation? Do I understand when I say somebody brought this to the table? So these expanded metaphorical uses for words we know are also one way in which we expand and improve our language. More dimensions of meaning, understanding subtlety, irony, cultural associations, implications, all of that. And then more nuanced meaning. If you think about, I remember one of the first things that I learned when I was in my first language course in teacher training, where there was a lot of focus on ways of looking, like the difference between gleaming, glaring, glazing, all of those words, staring, etc. And yes, it is looking, but one of the things that make me advanced is that I understand and I can use all of these nuances of meaning, the subtleties of how we express ourselves and how other people express themselves. And then, of course, there is the other side of it, which is that, yes, I want to do more with what I have, but I also need more than what I have. So more vocabulary, especially the specific, less frequent vocabulary. More contexts and uses. We talked a lot about this. And then less usual structures, less usual grammar. So we do associate things like inversions, or looking at different ways in which we use inversions, which is a rare thing with that. We associate sort of more context usage or things like idioms or understanding the ins and outs of phrasal verbs, it is also one thing that is typically associated with developing more advanced language. And then there is the question of what is the point of it all, which brings us back to motivation. Here I'm going to talk about this guy, Zoltan Dernier. He's one of my heroes, and he studied the psychology of language learning. And when we talk about motivation, some of you may be familiar with the idea of motivation being instrumental or integrative. Like instrumental is, I want to learn English to do something, to get a better job, to study, blah, blah, blah. Integrative is, I want to study it because I want to be part of the English-speaking community. There is like a cultural identity goal. He went a little bit deeper into this model, and then he talked about what he called the ideal selves. And he said that our motivation, a learner's motivation, connects three things, three images, three visions, he said. Number one, there is the vision of the ideal L2 self. So I want to become a person who speaks English. So what am I going to be able to do? Who am I going to be when I speak English well? Then there is what he called the ought to L2 self, which is what I should be, what I should do to avoid bad results. And then, so I want to study, I want to do my homework, I want to listen to my teacher, blah, blah, blah. And then there is my learning environment, my experience, so my teacher, my class, how I feel. Another interesting way to think about it is not to think of motivation, but to think of another term, which is engagement, which is a more contemporary word. And engagement, these are ideas that I got from an amazing book by Sarah Mercer and Zoltan Dernier, or a guy called Daniel Pink has an incredible book called Drive, which explores this in detail. And he said that engagement is the intersection of three things. First, there is autonomy. One thing that motivates me, that engages me, that connects me is like, I want to be autonomous, to be able to do the things that I want in my own way. I want to be able to manage what I do, when I do it, how I do it. And becoming more advanced, having more elements to express myself in English, builds a lot of autonomy. Another aspect is relatedness. So I want to feel like I belong. I want to feel connected to others. And then developing more advanced English is a lot about that. Many people who want to reach this level want to reach this because they want to relate to what they associate with English. And then there is the third one, which is the element of mastery. So mastery is to become better at something that matters to you. And mastery is a mindset, it's an attitude, it is a way of thinking. It is a pain, because mastery, becoming better at something, takes effort. So the idea that learning should be fun and easy, yes, well, we don't want to make it difficult and painful, but learning is difficult and painful. It takes effort. And then it is an asymptote. And because we are English teachers, not maths teachers, this is the most relevant thing to understand what happens between the elementary and the advanced levels and why people drop out at this level. Not just in English, but with anything, which is the intermediate plateau, the intermediate death zone. What explains that? Okay, imagine that we are building a graph where we have the competence and how long you've been studying something. And imagine that we have this advanced competence, like my idea of what the best user of English in the world is, and I want to become like that perfect user of English. At the beginning of my study, when I begin to study English, life is great, because if I develop a lot of very powerful skills really fast. Last week, I couldn't describe my house. Now I went to class and I can describe my house. The kitchen is this, I didn't know how to talk about my family. In 1 week, my teacher gave me lots of tools to say, I have a sister, I have 2 brothers, my mother is called Sylvia, blah, blah, blah. I couldn't talk about the past. Okay, 2 weeks of lessons, 1 month of lesson, and I can talk about things that I did last week. my teacher is amazing. I mean, life is great. I love English. And then I continue studying English. And then when I get into the more intermediate levels, I am still learning lots of things, but now I am learning things like the present perfect versus the present perfect continuous, or the difference between will and going to. Now, okay, they are both used to talk about the future. You're not really changing my life as much as you used to, teacher. And this is the level at which most adult learners give up. They say, I am not learning as much as I did, so is it worth it for me to just stick around? What happens when we go further into that? What happens when we become advanced? Well, it becomes a lot worse because, and this is true, this is not just true for English, this is true for anything. As you become more advanced, you are putting in as many hours as you did before, but the things that you are learning are suddenly like the distinction between glaring and staring. Okay, they are both ways of looking. Staring is looking fixedly, and glaring is looking fixedly when I'm angry. Am I really spending an afternoon studying this? So I am putting in as much work, but I am not getting as much payback. So an asymptote is this kind of curve where as we get close to an advanced level, sort of it never quite, as it gets there, it becomes more sort of flatter. So in terms of motivation, this is a very challenging time for learners because they want to go further, but we have to make them feel that they're making progress because the progress is not going to be as evident as it was before. So some approaches, some ideas on how to cope with these difficulties. New things to learn. We said that there are new things to learn, old things to relearn. What is the point, the motivation? And new things to learn. We want to develop a roadmap for competence progression to share it with our learners, and we want to work on their language awareness, on their awareness of the tools that they are using, and their awareness of the language that they are exposed to and how they can make it active. In terms of the old things to relearn, we want diagnostic assessment is going to be a must-have. So we are going to have to diagnose how much they know about what they think they know. We want to rebuild their knowledge, we want to deepen it, and we want to diversify it of the things they already think they know. And then we want to make this distinction, and then we want to have lots of meaningful input. We want to analyze the language that they listen, that they read, that they are exposed to, and stretched output. When they produce English, we want to make sure that they use everything actively. And then finally, in terms of the motivation, we want to set realistic goals, we want to make them meaningful, and we want to mark the milestones. So we want to make their progress in English as visible as possible. Now, it is already after 5, and nothing is more sacred than a teacher's time on a Friday afternoon. So I'm going to stop here. The last thing that I am going to say is that for learners who are reaching that advanced level, for learners who are getting to this stage, another important question is to think about the matter of language certification, because many of these learners are going to have a specific goal in mind for their English. Not all of them. Some of them will be studying English because they love English, because they want to read novels, because blah, 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 as a hobby, whatever. Now, other learners are going to be thinking about studying abroad. They're going to be thinking about jobs. They're going to be thinking about things like that. And for many of those things, they are going to need formal certificates that recognize their level. And not just any. If they're thinking about universities, for instance, if they're thinking about specific courses, if they're thinking about university students thinking about applying for scholarships, things like that, they're going to have to think about what are the universities that I want to go to and what are the exams that they expect, that they ask us to, that they expect learners to bring, which are the ones that they recognize, that they accept. Because it is easy to say, okay, I'll do IELTS, I'll do TOEFL, I'll do this, I'll do that. But then maybe the university that you're going to also accepts others. And things like TOEFL or IELTS sometimes come with expiration dates. Like in 2 years, this exam is not going to be valid anymore, literally, for IELTS and TOEFL. So if I am thinking about an exam that I can use for university, but that I also want to, then maybe this is great because I'm applying for university this year and it's the exam that I need. They recognize it, boom. But if I want something for my CV later on, maybe I want to think about a different exam. And if I want something because maybe I am going to be applying for university, but I am more interested in just having proof later on when I'm looking for a job that my English is really high, then maybe something like a C1 advanced or a C2 proficiency would be what you need more than the other ones. So certification becomes really important. Most people who reach these levels today are thinking about presenting some kind of exam, but then as teachers, to advise students on which is the right exam for them would be is something that we need to consider. So it's not just like an automatic question of, yes, there is this exam, it will sort out everything. Exams are good. Each exam is good for certain things, not so good for others. So be careful about which one you choose. So if there are any questions, please put them in the chat box. I've used 5 more minutes of your time than I said I would on a Friday, so it's inexcusable for me. It's the greatest sin. I really appreciate your time. I hope I have earned the privilege of your time today. It's a phrase that I learned from a movie that I saw a couple of weeks ago and that I really loved. Please, if there's any questions, just leave them there. There is some lovely feedback there from some of you already. I'm really happy that you enjoyed it, that you found it useful. Then Lauren said, for a private teacher, do you recommend a specific exam? If you're thinking as a teacher, if you're thinking of, I want an exam to prove my skills as a teacher, I would definitely be thinking of an exam that does not come with an expiration date. So, because an exam, like I said, an exam like IELTS or TOEFL, they're specifically developed for people who are going to university or for migration formal purposes, which means that after 2 years, they disappear from the database. You will still have your certificate on paper, but there will be no way to validate it. An exam like C1 Advanced, the Cambridge exam for level C1, or C2 Proficiency, a Cambridge exam for level C2, is still recognized for many uses, including most European universities, if you're thinking of things like that. But it will also not disappear from the database, which means in 5 years, if you're going to look for a job, if you're going to a school and they say, what is your level of English? You can still produce your certificate. They can validate it on the Cambridge database and everything will be golden. Okay, if you don't have any other questions, then I think it's time to wrap it up. I hope you have a lovely weekend. And May the 1st is a holiday, so get ready because we have another holiday coming shortly after Easter. Life is great sometimes. So thank you very, very, very much. I hope you've enjoyed this and see you again next time whenever the lovely people from Disal invite us.